I'm beginning to wonder if the world is divided into sports fans and music fans, and maybe never the twain shall meet.
They try with the Super Bowl every year, but
yeah, so we all, tune in for the halftime show, and then we're sorry we did that anyway, and then we leave.
Yes.
Well, hello there. I am Cool Gray, and you are listening to Cool Gray in Studio A. Thanks for coming back for episode 3. If you're coming back for episode 3, if you're joining me for the first time, I would recommend you go back and start with episode 1. I mean, it only makes sense. In any event, this may be episode 3, but it is only part 2 of my first series in this podcast, and that series is called Creativity Born of Trauma. We talked to Skip Sams last time, and we are going to talk to Ross Hamil today. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. I am talking about how the creative process can be informed, in some ways inspired, and sometimes part of the healing process for having been through a traumatic struggle of one kind or another. It is certainly my story, and that is why I thought it would be the perfect way to start the podcast, because I learned very quickly that I am not the only one. I knew that intuitively, but I found 6 people who were willing to come on this podcast and tell you their stories, or in a couple of cases, tell you how they integrate that very creative part of us into their own professional techniques for helping people overcome trauma. So I've got some really interesting people lined up, and I've had some fantastic conversations. I'm personally enriched by them. And of course, my goal is for you to be enriched by them too. After we finish that series, we are starting another series right after the new year. And that one, in case you thought you knew what this podcast is about, will be called Personal Paranormal Encounters. It couldn't be more different than the one that I'm bringing to you right now. And in that series, I'm talking to a number of people who either are working in a paranormal field or who are just your average, everyday Joes like you and I, who have had some extraordinary encounters that they don't have a normal explanation for. Therefore, it is a paranormal experience. So some of that stuff is spooky. Some of it's fascinating. I'm bringing you some fascinating stories, and I am encouraging you to think more deeply about these things in hopes that it will inspire some form of creative expression in you. That is what I'm all about. Encouraging and inspiring creative expression, whatever that looks like for you. I might be creating art. You might be creating a family. You might be creating, your own destiny, whatever that is. I just love that we think deeply about things when we are fascinated by them. And I'm trying to create an environment that surpasses what you would normally encounter scrolling social media, maybe reading an article, spending 5 minutes on a subject, and then making up your mind about it. There are a lot more layers to pretty much any subject than that. And so I'm a thinker, I'm an analyzer. If you are too, I'm sure that there are some things coming up in this series and in the next one that will definitely engage your gray matter in a brand new way. I have some shout outs today from some people that have been extraordinarily kind to me. So the first one is Pat L. in New Hampshire. Pat was already a Patreon supporter of mine, and she just decided to upgrade to the next tier. Why? Because at the $10 a month level, you get full video versions of every single one of these episodes. She wanted that. Pat will also be a guest on this podcast coming up soon, so stay tuned for her. And Pat, thank you. She's a great woman. The other person I want to shout out today is not a Patreon supporter, but he is a supporter in a far more personal way. And that is my hubs, the Mr. Cool Gray, otherwise known as Craig. And Craig has been supporting and enabling this habit of mine that I call podcasting since its inception. He has purchased equipment for me. He has configured audio settings, video settings, just encouraged me, and has been my own personal cheerleading section. I swear I'm going to get that guy some pom-poms. I'm very grateful to him. I love you, Craig. Now that I've made you all just a little bit nauseous, I'm going to move right along to a little commercial break, and then we'll get right into our interview. Hey, Cool Gray here. I want to talk to you for just a minute about Patreon. Patreon is a social media platform where you can support this podcast, my YouTube channel, and other artists who are doing what I'm doing, which is making stuff happen on our own dime, on our own time. This is a way that you can support those efforts. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I would encourage you to join me over there, not just because it helps me, but there are perks, people. Let me tell you what those are. At the very first tier of support, just $5 a month, you will get 24-hour advance access to every single episode in its audio format. At the $10 level and above, you will get a full video version of every single episode. That is not available anywhere else. Why is that amazing? Well, you'll be able to learn such things as, what do my guests even look like, especially when they're talking? Did I apply my eyeliner evenly? Am I wearing the same outfit as I was last episode? Do I have broccoli in my teeth? These are the things that are burning in your souls. I know you want to know the answers, and that's where you can find out. If you're not feeling goofy, I can also tell you that you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, not available anywhere else, monthly minisodes, and quarterly blooper reels. I am also offering fan access. You can make requests. You can say, hey, Cool Gray, make a minisode about this, or why don't you talk about that? And I will listen to you. I may not actually do it, but I will listen to you. I am doing everything that you see here, from the writing to the editing to the recording to the promotion to the graphics. It's all me by myself, and I'm just really trying to cover my costs. I would love to welcome you over there to become a part of this exclusive community that gets all the nifty stuff that the rest of you are missing out on. So come on over to patreon.com, find me as Cool Gray Studios. There's a link in the show notes that will take you there more directly, and I thank you for considering that. I'd like to introduce my guest today. Ross Hamil is a born and bred West Texas guy. He grew up in Odessa and moved to Lubbock after high school. Hailing from a creative and musical family, it's no surprise that Ross ended up where he is, working in video production and being the frontman for a hard rock band. With his company, Hamil Brothers Studios, Ross has traveled around the United States working on jobs for companies such as Oculus, Facebook, and Pennzoil. His current band, Labor XII, launched their debut album, Monsters, in November of 2021. It's a quasi-concept album with central themes being trauma and grief. Ross, thanks for being with me today. I'm very glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
You and I met actually during one of my own toughest times. You were referred to me after I lost my dad a little over a year ago, and you helped me clean up the audio of his service, which was held at a National Veterans Cemetery outdoors. There was a lot of wind noise. And while I might have been capable of handling that at the time, I simply wasn't. You were kind, compassionate, generous with your time, with your requirements, and you were instrumental in helping preserve the memory of that day for my family. So I want to start by saying thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Also for becoming a friend. You've been just a cool guy to know, and I can't wait to share that joy with my audience. So you and I are actually no strangers to grief and loss. We've had a couple of conversations about that, and we both seem to process those experiences through creative expression. Let's talk a little bit about the creative aspects of your life first. You mentioned that you come from a family of creatives. So tell me a little bit about your formative years.
Oh, man. So grew up, mother, dad, and grandparents on both sides of the family sang a lot. Grew up in the Church of Christ, which is a cappella music based. So learned very early on about harmony and the lack of tempo in those situations. But my mom has always been involved in musical programs, be it schools or church events, things like that. She was a music teacher for well over a decade, and my dad was a youth minister for a very long time. And with that comes the need for a lot of creativity, unless you just don't want to be good at your job. We have a joke that the name Hamil is an old native name for overkill, which is what we're known for. So we don't go at anything halfway. And so just growing up with a lot of music, a lot of creative entertainment environment, really, it was very formative, as you put it in my
Was that
formative.
contained to worship music, or was it a broad environment in your house?
It was a pretty broad environment. I ended up, we listened to the radio a lot. So at that point, CDs were the shiny new things that, you couldn't even listen to them in your car. So grew up listening to a lot of cassette tapes, a lot of older country music, Oak Ridge Boys, things like that. And then by the time I hit junior high, I had a cousin introduce me to rock. And my first encounters with rock were Collective Soul and Aerosmith.
So rock and roll will change anybody's life. How did it change yours?
How did it change mine? That's tough to say. So, Aerosmith and Collective Soul, early on, Matchbox 20. I fell in love with Matchbox 20 because Rob Thomas has such a unique voice, and the way he voices and phrases things are extremely unique. But the one that really got me, it was probably around 1999, was Creed.
Mm-hmm.
They were a huge influence. Mark Tremonti, their guitar player, is the reason I ever picked up a guitar. And I've been fortunate enough to actually tell him that on my birthday. I guess it was about 6 years ago. His solo band was coming through Texas, and my brother took me, and I've got a Tremonti signature guitar, and they allowed me to take it in. He signed it for me for my birthday. So
that is very
really
cool.
So that's about as influential as it gets.
I mean, I call that life-changing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Where did your professional trajectory begin here? I know that you were creative and active in the church environment, but you've done a lot of audio engineering, and that's been your life work, has it not?
Some audio, a lot of video, mostly video stuff. But with that comes the audio.
Sure.
Video, I really got into I would say maybe junior high. I enjoyed, playing with the camcorder, but my sophomore year in high school, I had a teacher it was my Spanish 2 year, and she was notorious for having video projects. And one day she was like, well, we're doing our first video project. Here's some examples of what kids have done. And I remember watching those going, this is horrible. Nobody wants to watch this. And it's so bad, nobody's going to learn anything from it. So I decided to go a little bonkers with mine. The project was a fashion show, and it was for learning articles of clothing. And I did movie and TV characters, but it was mostly me in horrible costumes doing it. But I had a camcorder, a karaoke machine, and a VCR. So I could do my voiceover through the karaoke machine with music and record it, marry that to the video running into the VCR.
And this was what year for you in school?
Let's see, that would have been around 1999, 2000.
And what grade?
I was a sophomore in high school.
I mean, that's pretty ambitious. You already knew how to use all of that equipment?
Well, the karaoke machine was a Radio Shack special, so it wasn't very complicated. But that's really where it all started, because, if I could have fun making the video. And one of the things I noticed with everybody else's is the only people laughing at them were the people that made them, because it was all inside jokes, and like none of us had any idea what was going on there. So I tried to make my jokes more universal, which came from my grandparents. They exposed me very early on to Leslie Nielsen, Mel Brooks, Gene Wilder, all the comedy greats.
Surely you're joking.
I've got it. It says, "Don't call me Shirley." Yep, right on my arm.
So for those not watching on video, that you're showing me a tattoo.
Yep, it's the twisted airplane, and and to kind of tie that into the whole grief journey. My grandmother passed away in January of 2016 as a result of complications from a car accident. But she was getting ready to go home from the hospital, and I had been up there visiting her, and I walked out of the room and stepped back in and said, "I just want to tell you good luck, and we're all counting on you." And the very last thing she said to me was, "Don't call me Shirley."
Oh my goodness, that is precious.
So literally got those words permanently implanted on my arm, because that was what we grew up with.
Wow.
And you always hear about people, I wish I could have said this, their last words to me, but I cannot think of better last words coming from my grandmother.
Really? I agree.
Don't call me Shirley.
That is the greatest memory. And that was the motivation for the tattoo?
Yes.
It wasn't just that you're an uber fan of Leslie Nielsen.
I am an uber fan of Leslie Nielsen, but not so much that I would commit, one of his lines to ink
You don't love
on
him
my
that much.
arm. No, like, I don't really get bothered by celebrity deaths, but there were two or three that I can recall, and Leslie Nielsen was one of them that just really wrecked me.
Yeah, I get that. I'll tell
But
you,
yeah.
for me, John Lennon was one and Prince was another. The two of
Mm,
them really kind of knocked the wind out of my sails. I get that.
yes.
Wow. So you were being a Hamill, apparently, by your own definition, as a sophomore in
Yes.
high school and,
Hmm.
and making all the other kids look like amateurs. Where did the professional life begin for you using these skills that apparently you developed very young?
I would say officially in 2011, from the time I was in high school until then, I made money doing it, but it was very sparse. I knew how I wanted things to look, and I just couldn't make it happen because that stuff wasn't available. And then, in the early 2010s, Canon released some DSLR cameras, the stills cameras that had video capability,
Right.
and their sensors were bigger, and they would do the frame rates that would match what you would see in a movie versus, there's a visual difference between a movie and a soap opera.
Yes.
One looks beautiful, the other looks horribly fake.
Right.
And so, like, I couldn't get anything that wasn't just terrible soap opera look. And finally, around 2011, I got into a camera that would do that. And the fall, I guess it was late summer of 2011, I got a job offer filming high school football for my alma mater. And I took it, quit my full time job because what I was going to make shooting football was better than my minimum wage. So I ended up quitting that and shooting football from August pretty much through Thanksgiving. And then tying it all together with a big film in January that was going to play at their banquet. And it just took off from there.
Were you a football fan or was it just a job for you?
It was just a job for me. Truth be told, growing up, I grew up in Odessa, Texas, which is known for Permian high school football. If you know anything about high school football, Varsity Blues, Friday Night Lights, both those movies were made about Permian. I just didn't get into football.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't love football, then you were treated like some kind of freak or alien, and not just like, oh, this guy doesn't like football. And people were mean about it.
Yeah.
And so no, I grew up with a disdain for football until I started. When you get down on the field with a camera and you have a few run-ins where a play comes out of bounds and nearly kills you, it gives you a greater appreciation for it. But
well, I can relate to feeling like a misfit because you're not into sports. And I'm beginning to wonder if the world is divided into sports fans and music fans, and maybe never the twain shall meet.
They try with the Super Bowl every year, but
yeah, so we all, tune in for the halftime show, and then we're sorry we did that anyway, and then we leave.
Yes.
My husband and I are New Yorkers, and we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, during the week of the Florida-Georgia game, which apparently is a much bigger deal than we Yankees realized. So we were literally driving into town with cars all around us with the flags for either Florida or Georgia stuck in their windows. And we looked around and said, oh my gosh, will they let us stay once they find out we really couldn't care less about what's going on in the football world? And here in Jacksonville, man, they love their Jaguars, no matter no matter what kind of performance they're doing. And I've managed to be here for 17 years without ever having to have a meaningful conversation about football. They let me stay. So the story has a happy ending.
You can't be in Florida with the happiest place on earth and be a jerk all the time. So.
What do you think? Is there a hard divide between music people and sports people? Do you know people who are enthusiastic about both equally?
I do. Me being one of them now. And you look at like baseball or wrestling where they all have their walk-up songs and people go nuts. I think, you can have the people that like sports, or you have the people that love them, people that like them, and the people that don't care. But I think music's universal. They may not just listen to it all the time, but in filmmaking, music is what tells people how to feel. when they're watching,
It's true.
whatever it is.
Yeah. And even at sporting events, I guess at every single one, no matter what the sport is, you hear "We Will Rock You" at some point in the stadium.
Yep, that and AC/DC,
Yeah.
just anything to get the blood pumping.
Yeah. Well, great point. That issue's now settled for all time. I'm so glad we solved one of the mysteries of the universe in this episode.
I try to be an expert if I'm going to speculate.
Yes, thank you for your insight on that. So speaking of music, tell me about Labor XII. I know it's not your first band, but when was it formed and how was it formed, and who the heck's in it?
I conned my brother into joining the band or forming it with me on March 20th of 2019. Well, 2 nights before, a friend had taken me to see Metallica. And then the night before, my brother took my wife and I to go see Seven Dust and Mark Tremonti's solo band. And I'd been wanting to kind of put a band together with him. He had a bunch of music written that he'd never done anything with. I knew that of course, he didn't want to form a band because he tried, and nobody's as committed as you want them to be until you find the people that are.
Right.
But everybody wants to be in a band until they figure out how much work goes into it.
The same is true of podcasting, by the way.
The same is true of anything. Nobody's going to be as excited about your project as you are.
That is so true.
Unless they are. And there's really no qualifier, no way to quantify that that I've found. But I knew I could sucker him into it with that after concert high. So, man, the show is so great. And I was like, yeah, wouldn't it be fun to be on the other side? And he was like, yeah, that'd be pretty great. And so we put it together, and a couple of friends of ours who were closer to my age. My brother's 8 years younger than I am. A couple of friends that were closer to my age, one was a drummer, one was a guitar player who could also play bass. And we talked to them, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. For the longest time, it was just getting together and screwing around. But it was fun. It was a good chance to just have some bonding time with friends. And then our drummer got hired by John Deere to move up to Chicago. And then our bass player was getting relocated with his job. So we ended up losing half of our band within just a few weeks of each other. And we ended up landing with the guys we have now. Our bass player is Tanner, and our drummer's Randy.
Did you audition them, or how did you find them?
We did. We auditioned them. We ended up trying out the worship minister at the church I attend and another guy that plays bass. And we ended up going with the other guy, Tanner, because I didn't want to compromise our worship leader's job by, actually our first show was a 420 festival.
Oh.
And I knew that was probably a non-starter.
Yeah.
And so it was an easy enough conversation to have. Man, you did great, but I can't ask you to risk your job for a band it's just a glorified hobby.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where we landed. Drummers, it was hard to find a drummer at all. And the one we have, Randy, very reliable guy. He actually had a place for us to practice, has a little workshop behind his house. And so
that can often be the most important member of any band.
It really can be. But we auditioned him, and he practiced his butt off for that audition. And it was very apparent that he wanted it. And that one was a no-brainer. He was the only person we auditioned because we didn't feel like we needed to audition anybody else.
So backing you up for a second, when you talked about your worship leader and a potential conflict, you're describing your music as hard rock, and it is. The subject matter, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, of monsters is quite dark in some ways, but also very uplifting in others, because it touches things in us all that I think we need to find a way to process our emotions about. I'm just wondering, with my podcast, part of the motivation for me in doing this is to really get in touch with the most authentic side of myself, which sometimes there's a concern if you come out of a church environment, which I have. I no longer am a part of the church that I was attending at the time that I started my YouTube channel, but both of those creative outlets were very directly my way of saying, I have to be who I am authentically. And sometimes there are people that I'm in affiliated organizations with that might not approve or might not feel that it's a good reflection on the church as a whole. If I'm using a particular format, if I'm dressed a particular way, and I'm in a place in my life right now where I'm living out loud and just full on rejecting that I need to conform to that. And in order to appropriately express my spiritual side as well as my creative side, I just don't think that they conflict, and that everything that's in me creatively was provided by God. So, but at the same time, you're talking about a worship leader who has a job and is a very direct representative because he's on payroll of that organization. So for him, I get it. Coming out of a family that was involved in the church in the way that you were, how do you reconcile it?
So the church that we attended, where my dad was the minister for a very long time, I don't remember how old I was. I couldn't have been much older than 6 years old. That church, it was a pretty good place for a while, but after being there, I was there for at least 12 years, and it got very toxic to the point that they were losing ministers, and the leadership would just hire somebody, to use the phrase, sight unseen. They hired a very specific minister who, if they had done their research, he had split every church he had worked at. But they didn't care. Some of the leaders were asked to resign and they wouldn't. They refused. I dated a girl who tried to have me kicked out of the church. I caught her lying about my situation, tried to call the police on me for being a peeping Tom. And the dates that she gave the police, I was in Canada. So, very obvious.
That's a long range peep.
Man, I couldn't afford those binoculars. But so all of these things happened over the course of a few years, and my family backed me up. But the church leadership really pushed me away, and I left the church for a very long time. And then I got pulled back in. The friend who's the worship minister now, he and his wife are having a baby, and he asked me to fill in at another church he was playing guitar at. And I was like, oh, okay. I haven't played guitar in a while. I was burned out, but I wanted to get back into it. And it seemed like a fairly low risk environment. And I did that for a few years. And then he moved to this new church. He got the worship minister position, and I followed him over. And one of the things that has been the most valuable to me with that particular congregation is they are very welcoming and all-encompassing. I can dress how I want to. We released a new t-shirt a few weeks ago, or about a month ago, I guess. And every minister at church has purchased one. Most of them have seen us play, but I don't find it hard to reconcile because, the environments, we're playing in bars and clubs. We're not a Christian band, although I do have my values and my ethics, and I'm not going to cross those lines no matter what my creative outlet.
You don't find them to be in conflict with what you're doing?
No, I do not at all.
And it sounds like neither does this particular church. So you found a place where the synergy is there. The church that I came out of would have made you step down from the music ministry if you were seen in a bar. If you were seen, if my husband and I were seen on a date in a restaurant and there was a glass of wine on the table, we would have had to step off the platform ministry. And that was just something I couldn't live with and feel true to myself any longer. It just didn't make sense to me.
I've gone out with a few of our ministers. We'll go to Buffalo Wild Wings or a place like that, and eat wings and grab a couple of drinks. As long as it's in moderation. But yeah, it's been an interesting environment not to feel like I can't talk about being in a band. And one of the greater ironies about it is when I'm playing at church, I play with about the same energy that I do when I'm with the band at a hard rock venue, and everybody seems to love it. Some people might think I'm showing off, but I just can't help it. I can't stand still and play guitar.
You get to authentically express yourself in both environments, and I think that's really as it should be.
I play with my whole body. The people that you would think would complain about it, there's some of the people that come up afterwards and they're like, I just love watching you play. It just makes me feel good. And I can't think of a higher compliment.
That's wonderful. So you've got Labor 12 now. You're able to do that. Was the idea to play out in bars and clubs? Was the idea to record? What was the thing that brought you all together initially? And how did that grow in time?
We wanted to play. One of the most miserable things over the years is going to concerts and knowing I'm not going to be on that stage. And there was a time around 2000, I guess it was 2011, the band I was with broke up. and it was nasty. I probably have some PTSD from it.
Oh gosh.
And so I quit playing guitar, quit doing music completely after that for at least a year. Then my friend hit me up about playing at church, but the longer I did that, I got bored with it because it was predictable. Some days it was fun, but I couldn't play like I really wanted to play, not at the first church. I want to write original music. I don't want to play covers. I've done that and it's okay, but it's so therapeutic for me. You're talking about the grief and that being almost its own therapy exercise. That's always been a big deal for me. Of course, the music's matured as I've gotten older, and the content is less about pithy high school or early adulthood things that everybody whines about.
Teenage angst.
And it's teenage angst, yes, very much. And it's grown into, as you heard with the song I sent you, it's turned into something that almost everybody can identify with, no matter where they are in life. So that was a big part of it, was just basically, extracting the poison out of my body. And, along with that, wanting to play on stage, because there's just an energy that you can't get any other way.
For sure.
And
I know that's true.
One of my greatest accomplishments with a band was, we have a fairly large radio station here, and they had a birthday bash, and we got to be the opener. By the time we went on as the first band, the venue was at capacity. We'd had our song in rotation on the local radio station regularly. And when we played that song, I could not hear my floor monitors over the crowd singing to me.
That's such a great moment.
I don't know that I will ever get to feel that again. If I can't be there, I want to get close. So, writing music, we wanted to record an album because I love the process, but I've never had an album that when it was done, I could say 100% I was happy with it. The music might have been great, but the mix wasn't, or the mix was pretty good, but some of the songs, listening back, they're kind of dumb. Going back to that whole teenage angst thing, it's like, what a wiener.
We all have to go through our wiener phase before
we do.
Before we can grow up and fully
Yeah.
actualize. Yeah, I want to find out how you got from playing out and realizing that you wanted to record an album, and that album was Monsters. So it's your first collaborative recording project as a band, and yet you describe it as a quasi concept album. Why isn't it just a full-on concept album? It appears to me to be one.
The term quasi concept album came from a gentleman who, I can't remember if he's a professor at our state university here, but he does run a radio show on our public broadcast station here. He reviewed it, and that's what he called it. And I really liked that, because when I think of a concept album, I think of something like Pink Floyd's The Wall. There's a continuous story. Like, I think of you take a story and then you write songs out of that.
So rock operas like Tommy and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Some, kind of like that. Pink Floyd's The Wall, I think, is one of the greatest examples of the concept album, because it's Pink's story.
And in a way, this is your story as well. So the record isn't I'm calling it a record. The album isn't isn't telling a story that follows a line throughout the whole project, but it's a theme album.
Yes, it is very themed.
Tell me a little bit about how that was born. I can understand how that would come out of one person, but all of your band members contributed to this. So what were those conversations like that led to, we're doing this?
So for the most part, I write all of the lyrics. The exception, coincidentally, being Everglade. That was a song that my brother Jacob wrote, but lyrically, all of the songs came from burdens that I have borne through all sorts of encounters. And so the band, they didn't feel like they had to have a vote on what the content of the song reflected, because their parts came through, or their input came through in what they contributed. So, as far as the themes and the meaning behind the music, it was all, with the exception of Everglade, me. And I wrote probably half the lyrics on Everglade, or rewrote them. When I told him I wanted to put that song on the album, he was like, I don't know. The lyrics just aren't great. And I was like, yeah, the lyrics aren't in the verses, but the choruses, they're perfect. And if you don't mind, I know this song is your baby, and you wrote it for, there was a lady, I believe she had Alzheimer's, that was a dear family friend. And I asked him, I was like, do you mind if I take a crack at rewriting the lyrics? Because at the time we were battling with our grandmother's dementia. And I said, I would like to repurpose the song to be more about Meemaw, if that's okay. And he was like, I think that's a wonderful idea. So I wrote the lyrics, and every step of the way, I'm like, hey, I did this. Is this cool? I rewrote the melody. Is that cool? And he was happy with all of it. But it really wasn't hard to get everybody together on the same page, because early on, before we even had band members, I knew that I wanted this album to be about, and really every album for me is about things that I've battled with. And I wanted to expand that to things that I knew, or at least to phrase it all in ways that I knew all of us struggle with.
The monsters that you're referring to
Exactly.
are the real monsters that we have
Yeah.
to do battle with every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the only song on the album that really hammered on something that I haven't personally dealt with is a song called Head Rush. And our bass player has struggled with alcoholism to a point that it has caused him some serious issues at points in his life. And I was helping he and his wife move out of a rent house into a house they purchased. And he was like, hey, if we can, I want to make one of the songs about that. You guys are getting to put your monsters in the album, and this one's mine. And I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, absolutely. You're as much a part of this band as the rest of us. So I took what I knew about alcoholism and addiction and gave it a voice.
In collaboration with him, or did you just observe him, write the song, and see what he thought about it? What was that like?
It wasn't specifically about him. It's more about my encounters and observances with people that do battle substance abuse, and how I interpret that demon talks to them. And a lot of these songs, there's kind of a duality to them. It is the monster talking and the listener responding, or in my case, me responding.
How did that band member feel when he heard the finished song? Did it resonate the way that he wanted it to? His contribution to the album, it satisfied that desire?
Yeah. I don't know how to say this. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I try to be generic but poetic at the same time, because I hate it when I hear lyrics and somebody uses the same word to rhyme in two lines, unless it's absolutely necessary or it's a repetitive line throughout the song. So I don't want the lyrics to sound cheap, but I really wanted this to be something that when people listen to it, it really doesn't matter what they're struggling with. They can go, oh my gosh, that's me. Or they can look at, a friend or a family member and go, oh, I kind of get what they're going through.
Yeah.
Now. So when I was finished with that song, it's called Head Rush. I sent him the demo. He was like, dude, you nailed it. He was very happy with it. Everybody loved it.
That's awesome. So Everglade, I'm actually going to close this episode playing that song in its entirety. And I'll tell my audience in advance, it's just an absolutely beautiful song that has some personal resonance for me as well. So on first listen, I was a blubbering mess. So when you get to the end of this episode, make sure your tissue box is nearby. You made the song really a reference to your grandma, who was struggling with diminishing mental capacity. And that's very hard to watch in people that we love. And now you're talking about substance struggles, these monsters. Let's talk a little bit about one of the other songs, Mirror, Mirror, which is dealing with another monster.
So Mirror, Mirror is, bluntly putting it, it is about suicide just in its entirety.
It's a big monster.
It is a very big monster, and it's been a very big monster for me, really for everybody in the band, personally. It started off for me in high school. I went through some really traumatic experiences and never acted on it, but seriously considered committing suicide. Jacob and I are in the band. We have a third brother. As early as the second grade, he was attempting suicide because he had a verbally abusive teacher, and he just, his little psyche at that point arrived at the conclusion of, if I'm not alive, I can't be hurt. It's something that he has struggled with all the way through this last year, and he could struggle with it for the rest of his life. And I can tell this story with his permission. He was committed to a facility last October, and he had a plan, but he had a panic attack that prevented him from executing it, and he was caught before he was able to do it. But he'd been hospitalized, not really hospitalized, but he'd been taken to the hospital with the crisis team. on a few occasions. My daughter, who just turned 18, has had suicidal thoughts. My brother Jacob, when he was in high school, if I'm not mistaken, at some point he was sitting on the end of the bed with a gun in his mouth in February of 2020. Within a week, we lost two very dear friends of ours to suicide. One of them had attempted and survived years before. He helped a lot of people through some of their darkest times, and then couldn't pull through his last one. Another friend of ours that same week, my belief is that his medication was off and drove him to that point. And then once we started writing this album, another lady who had been tied to helping our other brother deal with his abuse ended up taking her own life. And that day was the day I started recording vocals for Mirror Mirror. Wasn't planning on it. We didn't even have a vocal booth built, but I got the news over lunch. I was having Chinese food at the mall with my wife, and I got the news and called my brother Jacob. He was helping me. I engineered most of the album, but when I was getting my parts recorded, he was the one hitting the record button. I called him and said, we were going to record your guitar stuff this afternoon, but we have to record these vocals today. And so that song was recorded. I don't know that it was the same day that this lady took her own life, but it was it was within 24 hours because it needed to be done.
Yeah. And that resonance will be with you every time you hear the song, I imagine.
Yeah, every time.
I know that kind of struggle tends to run in families, and it runs in mine as well. You and I met when I lost my dad, who died at 89 of cancer, but we didn't make it to the 1 year mark. It was 10 months after Dad died, just this past May, that we lost my brother, who's the baby of the family, my youngest sibling. And I will also add, I'm a survivor. I had an attempt back in the mid-90s, and I was also unsuccessful and very grateful. So for me, there is not a period there. There is a semicolon, but there are 5 members of my family that we've lost to suicide. So I feel what you're feeling on that. I don't know why brain chemistry like that gets inherited. It seems to me like it ought to be kind of rooted out in the evolutionary process. It's so counter to life, which is what we're here to do, live, that you're able to find a way to, like you said, excise the poison from your body through creative expression is exactly what this series that I'm doing right now is all about.
Yeah.
That's a very satisfying thing to do for me. My creative expression is this. It's talking about it, processing it out loud, sharing it with other people, using the skill set that I have in order to reach my own heart and the hearts of others. And so my guess is that what you wanted to do with Monsters is not only go through your own healing process, but I have to believe that the idea was wanting to reach other people and help them cope with their own monsters.
Absolutely. I've gone to counseling, I've done therapy. Neither of those helped in any way. Not saying that it doesn't help people, but it didn't do what I needed it to do. But I ended up going through, I don't even know what you call it. It was a training experience back in 2015. They called it emotional core training, but it was very much, a deconstruction process and a reconstruction process. In my opinion, a good therapy helps you give those monsters a name, helps you identify them. And even if you don't know that they're there were things that came up for me through that experience that I had completely forgotten about, but they came up, and just giving these things a name takes their power. So that was one of many reasons for this. Like, this album, first off, was for me. And then I wanted a fringe benefit of that to be that it was for everybody else. A lot of my favorite albums are that way. They wrote about whatever they were fighting with, but when I listen to it, I feel like they're on my journey in my fights with me.
Yeah, and that has to be a fringe benefit, because if you're writing from that place, like for other people, I do think that the overall project can suffer. You have to be internal.
Right. It's not genuine.
Yeah, during the creation. But you have to hope that a big part of why we are doing it to begin with is it's a communication mechanism We're
Yeah.
not just doing it so we're the only person that ever listens to our own music, but that introspection is crucial. What kind of feedback have you gotten?
Oh man, we've gotten a ton of feedback. We were playing at one of the venues here in town, and after we were done, a guy came up, probably mid 20s, maybe early 30s, and he told me, he said, that suicide song, you saved my life. This was going to be the last fun thing I ever did. I was going home to kill myself tonight. And when you started going through that song, it made me think about my daughter. If I recall, she was younger than Tim. And you gave me a voice to not go through with that. I just had to tell you. And when we did the album, we have in one of the pages of the booklet, we call it the Mirror Memorial page, and there's the memorials and the survivors, because we want to celebrate the people who, if they attempted and failed, or they thought about attempting and just couldn't do it for whatever reason. We want to celebrate with those people, but we also want to mourn with those who have lost somebody to that fight.
Yeah.
We want to mourn the loss of those who lost their own battle. And every time we play the song, I always address the song and tell people, if you identify with any of these three categories, I want you to put your hand up and I want you to leave it up. First category is if you know somebody who their family have lost somebody to suicide, put your hand up, keep it up. The second category is if you or your family have lost somebody to suicide. And it could be a friend, it could be a family member, but if you've directly lost somebody, put your hand up and keep it up. And the third category is if you have ever felt or you're feeling like that's your only way out, put your hand up, keep it up. And for that last category, while everybody's hands are up, I want you to look around the room and see how many hands are in the air.
I'll bet it's pretty close to everyone.
If it's not everyone, it's because some of them just don't want to participate. And with that, I tell them there's a room full of people here that will tell you, even if you can't see it, the world is better with you in it. But we, being the band, we're not naive enough to believe that when you're having your worst time, that all of this is going to be here for you. So that's why this song was written. So when you're in your deepest and your darkest moment, the one person that can stop you, you can look in that mirror, look that person in the eye. And I literally quote the lyrics and say, mirror, please don't let me fade. People hate it when we play Everglade because nobody wants to go bawl their eyes out at a concert. They love the song, but they don't want to go on that emotional roller coaster. And then another song called The Last Goodbye that we play, wrote it about my grandmother passing in the hospital. There's something on this album for everybody, and we've heard tons of stories, and it's been one of the best experiences of my life. And the beauty of it is so many stories that we hear have nothing to do with why any one of these songs were written, but it turns into a shoe that fits them.
Those of us that create in a way that is meant to reach other people, I think all of us come to a point in our life where we're trying to figure out what we're doing here. Like, why do I exist? And the kinds of connections that you can make through creative expression, and I think particularly creative expression that comes out of some kind of personal struggle, especially if it opens a window of hope or encouragement. But even if it doesn't, not every one of these songs necessarily does that. I don't know that Mirror Mirror offers that, but it still saved a life. And that's what it's all about. When you're looking in a mirror saying, what am I doing here? That's what we're doing here. We can touch each other in a way that connects us as humans.
I think all of the songs do bring a level of hope, but maybe not in the way you see it, because if they hear the song and it resonates with them, they know that they're not alone.
The hope is intrinsic in that. Right.
Exactly. So even if the song isn't hopeful, the first single that we released off the album, that song was called Suffocate, and it was written, the content of that came the night before the band was formed. And it was written about a young lady who was suffering and ultimately died from cystic fibrosis. The song is literally about her fighting that. That was her monster. And very much one of those, we've had several people come up, that song just, it reminds me so much of my drug addiction or my alcohol addiction or whatever. And that song is not hopeful at all. The young lady lost her life. I met her. It was similar to how we met. She was getting married, and a friend of mine was looking for a photographer, and we offered up our video services for free. And so just kind of, what do they call that? A meet cute, I guess.
Yeah. Cute.
That's how we met. And she actually got married on my wedding anniversary. which was a strangely easy conversation to have with my wife. Hey, I know it's our anniversary, but this young lady she's dying in the hospital and she's getting married.
Oh,
And
gosh.
of course, it was a no-brainer. But met her in February and she passed away in August 2019. That song, there's no hope in the lyrical content, but if somebody identifies with it and knows they're not alone through that struggle, like you said, the hope is intrinsic. And so it's been a wonderful byproduct.
And what you put out there was processing something inside of you, and it allows other people to process something that's inside of them. One of the subjects that I am fascinated with in my life these days is exploring the very nature of consciousness. And I've talked about this with some other guests before too. What is it actually? This consciousness, it's like a foundational element of the universe. It just is. You can't break that down or deconstruct it any further.
Right.
And in that, we are all one. We're all connected because we share this quality. And so if we're not about the business of connecting with each other, I think we're missing something core to why we're here to begin with. So I'm thrilled with what you're doing. I know it's touched my life. Tell me about how Monsters has been distributed and where people can find it if they want to hear the entire album.
Well, it is distributed everywhere. Our preference would be you go to our website, laborxii.com. If you buy a CD version, it comes with a digital download. That way we make the most money on it, which helps us further our message. It helps us travel and play in other cities. It's going to help us make another album when the time comes. So our website would be the first place I would go, but iTunes, Google Play, anywhere you can purchase an MP3, Amazon, you can purchase the album, or you can stream it on any platform, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, whatever. Or if you feel so inclined and you want to throw a snippet in your TikTok, we've got it on Instagram, TikTok, all those that it can be used as well.
And you mentioned travel and you mentioned another album. What is coming up immediately next for you?
Well, immediately, we've got a few shows lined up. We're taking a break playing here in our hometown because we are played out. When Collective Soul comes, if there's an opening, we're not going to turn that one down. But we're done with the small shows for a while. We're going to be playing in the DFW area, Dallas, Fort Worth. We've got a Halloween show in Abilene, and really that's all we have on the books for now. You didn't hear it from me, but we may have started writing for the next album, but we're not going to do anything with that until we're done riding the wave on this first one.
Well, we're going to wind it up for today. I'm so grateful for this conversation and the fact that I've managed to find this lovely collection of people who can talk about the subject of creativity born of trauma from so many different angles in a way that is so meaningful and hopefully enjoyable to the audience. So I want to thank you for being a part of that today.
Thank you. Can I
and we're going to have you
one thing in real quick? Anybody that listens to the music, reach out to us on social media, email us through the website. It means a lot to me to hear their stories. And I do enjoy knowing that it's identified with people. So anybody that listens, I want to hear your stories genuinely. It's not just...
They can slide into your DMs for that?
Yes, they absolutely can. And even if it's looking for somebody to have a hard conversation with, or looking for somebody that, you and I've had conversations, Lynn, especially around when your dad passed. I've been around that. I'm not going to say I've walked in your shoes, but I feel like I was able to share, just some valuable insights or say something comforting.
Just the connection alone sometimes is enough.
Yeah.
That's a very generous invitation.
I want to know how this music is helping people.
I want to thank Ross for joining me today. What a wonderful guy and what a wonderful guest. Ross will be back in the next series to talk to us about his personal paranormal experiences. So please come back after the first of the year for that series, and you'll get to meet Ross in a whole new way. Please check the show notes for a little bit more information about Ross and to find out how to get in touch with him and how to get your own copy of Monsters. If hard rock is not your thing, you might be surprised. There's some extraordinarily listenable stuff on this record. I'm so old school. I keep calling things records. Those were those discs that you used to be able to put on a record player and then put a needle on them and they would go around and around and around and make the music. That's what I'm talking about. I miss those days. The next episode will be released in 2 weeks, November the 2nd. So subscribe now so that you won't miss a single thing wherever you listen to podcasts, or find me on YouTube or on my website, coolgraystudios.com. Until then, I'm going to leave you with this beautiful song off of Monsters called Everglade. Get your tissue boxes ready and enjoy it. Thank you for listening. Come on back, and I'll see you next time.
I'll be thinking about you. I love you very much. Talk to you later. Bye, sweetie.
The cornerstone has cracked, held up your part of the world, a part you will never get back, that made you feel safe and secure. You're drifting towards the dark that's disguised itself as light. Reality's falling apart as I hold your hand. You're not the one I knew. Please know that I love you as I watch you slip away. As I gaze into your eyes, there's nothing I can do. I'll be lost if I lose you, but I'm running out of time. The sun begins to set, though dawn will never break. There's so much to regret. There's too much now at stake. You journey to the void, and my soul calls to the sky. I'd give my world to have more. As I hold your hand, you're not the one I knew. Please know that I love you as I watch you slip away. just rain.